I want to just, and we just started the recording. So what I wanted to all let you know is we've had a little bit of a hiccup this week with programming. On Thursday, I received a phone call, unfortunately, from both Inga and who's in New York, and Jackie Young, who is in the UK. And Inga just came out of the hospital. She's fine and recovering. And Jackie had a second booster and had a really bad reaction, and both needed to actually cancel the program that they were involved in. So I quickly had to do my juggling act, and I have Yifat and Thomas Geves in Israel standing by to come into the program. Unfortunately, they're having technical problems on their computer, and I can't get them into this program. Yes. And Yifat has, and Thomas Geves has an amazing program. He actually has a program called A Boy Who Drew Auschwitz. So it was quite an amazing story, and he will eventually tell his story, but probably not today.
Jeffrey, may I say something? I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I also had a problem getting on your program today, and it never happened before. So I'm wondering if you could let them know, the people in Israel who are supposed to present, that they should just put in give them the meeting number and the passcode, but for today. That's the way I was able to get in.
Yeah, so you just typed in, you went to Zoom, right? What, you went to zoom.us?
I went to the Zoom. I do have a Zoom, and let me see what I entered, because
I also had a problem logging in. Yes.
You know, Jeffrey,
and I know what the problem is.
Yes, what is it?
You had that huge link, and that link downloads a meeting request, a meeting, and there it is where your Zoom link is.
Yeah,
so
you have to download to the
no good.
calendar.
People are never going to figure it out, and especially in the last minute when they. I tried for.
No, I figured it out. It downloaded to the calendar.
Exactly.
No, this is wrong. This is wrong. And then I saw the link on the calendar, and the calendar link.
Exactly. So Jeffrey, for your future, you should only put the Zoom link.
Miriam, if I have to solve the problem, I can't have three conversations. So I'm going to allow
I didn't think it was
Carla, if you don't mind, why don't you begin your first song? I'm going to go offline, see if I can get this fixed the way Eva and Miriam has told me, and Judy, and I'll see if I can get Yifat in. But it would be great, Carla, to have you sing your first song while I go away and do what I need to do. Is that possible? Carla?
Oh, she turned it off.
Sorry, I know I am muted because I am muted, and I just want to ask when I'm singing that everybody tries to keep mute.
Okay, I'm going to mute everybody so you can.
And
so hold on a second.
okay, but you're gonna go off, Jeff, so you won't be recording anymore, I guess. Wonder if I should do the first song.
Carla, just go as we originally planned.
Okay.
Your first song, then your second song. I will be back. So just go ahead.
Okay. Okay, everyone. So we're about to.
Everyone is muted, so you can begin at any time.
Okay. This first song, can you hear me well, right? Okay, I'm starting the program with this Holocaust song. 7 días encerrados en vagones de behemas. Una vez a los 3 días mosquitaban a airear. Madre mía, mi querida, ya tuviste el zehut de morirte en tus tierras y no pasaste por el Oluk. Padre mío, mi querido, ¿quién te lo iba a decir? Que vinieras con tu hermano al crematorio de Auschwitz. Que vinieras con tu hermano al crematorio de Auschwitz. Padre, madre, hermanos y hermanicas, saliendo todos reyes al patrón del mundo, que envíe salud a mí, que me quite de estos campos para echar Kaddish. Que envite de estos campos para echar Kaddish.
Thank you. Thank you. It's beautiful.
Thank
Okay.
you. So the words were written by David Heim, who were working in the crematorium of Auschwitz, and such music by a musician by the name of Yaakov. And this song speaks of the inhumane situation on the trains leading to the camps. And the singer, it speaks to his family, to his mother, saying how lucky she was to die in her own land, and to his father, saying who would have thought he would die with his brother in Auschwitz, right? And the singer asked for his dead relatives to pray that he will be left alive, so that will live alive so he can say Kaddish for them. I wanted to explain. And this song was collected by Dr. Susanna Weiss-Shahak in 1986 in Tel Aviv. And I'm so pleased and thankful that she thought me about this, and I wanted to bring something in the Ladino language for you.
Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to, we're still trying to get Yifat in. For you, those of you who are new and have just come in, we've had a bit of a challenge with this program for this week. I'll repeat myself for those who have heard this. Both Inga and Jackie came ill on Thursday, independently from each other. One is in New York and the other is in the UK, and had to withdraw from the program. I am working on trying to get our substitute speaker in from Israel. So hopefully I've just communicated what Miriam and what Eva shared with me on how to achieve this. And we're having a running conversation going on. So if this doesn't work, I have a second plan, which is for you to all think about your parents as I think about my parents, and how my parents survived and came to this country or wherever you are. And I want you to tell a short story about how they came. Yifat is coming. Very good. Thank you, guys. Beautiful. So we will have her on board with us in a minute. But anyway, the second part of our program will have an audience participation. And I want you to think about a story that you can tell our audience about your parents and how they came from the darkness of the Holocaust into the light. And maybe it's something that you can remember that they've done for your family, what they have a special tradition, whatever you choose. And we're going to have the second half of the program available to have us with us. So I want to ask Yifat if she can hear me. Can you tell me where you are and speak to us so we can see you, Yifat? Yifat Cohen Mayer, are you with us? Oh boy.
Yes, hi.
Okay, where are you?
They
Wait.
didn't allow me to unmute. Hi, I'm trying to get the video on now.
Oh,
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. So sorry, technology.
well, from Israel to our hearts. So we welcome you officially to the program, and we have more and more people coming. Mark, I'm glad you were able to get on. I apologize. This is the only program that I use the concurrent link for. So I said it may be easier for everyone if I just use one program for all three programs, one Zoom link for all three programs. I will never do that again, because I'm sure there are people who are trying to get on and can't and are not interested in fighting the fight. So let's start. I have some interesting beginnings, and Carla, who has just sung her first of 3 songs today. But before she sings her next song, I want to also say a few words about the program and where we are going from here. So every year I dedicate the Yom HaShoah program to my parents. My parents were survivors of Auschwitz, and my dad was a survivor. He escaped Nazi Berlin in 1935 at age 15. I have only good memories of my parents. They met each other in Israel, and they eventually came to the United States in 1954, pregnant with my sister. I was born in Allentown, PA in 1958. And the second half of our program is going to be able to tell your little story about what your memories are of your parents and their move from the darkness of the Holocaust into the light. Before we get started, I'm going to do a couple things. One is I'm going to light a candle for my parents, which is coming on screen right now. And if you have any interest in lighting a candle, that's fine. It would be terrific. I'm also going to say the Kaddish, but I'm going to say it in English. Magnified and sanctified is the great name of God throughout the world, which was created according to the divine will. May the rule of peace be established speedily in our time unto us and unto the entire household of Israel. And let us say, Amen. May God's great name be praised throughout all eternity, glorified and celebrated, lauded, praised, acclaimed, honored, extolled, and exalted. Ever be the name of the Holy One, far beyond all song, psalm, beyond all hymns of glory, which mortals can offer, and let us say, Amen. May there be abundant peace from heaven, with life goodness for us and for all thy people Israel, and let us say, Amen. May the one who brings peace to the universe bring peace to us and to all people Israel, and let us all say, Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so I'm going to now share my screen, and I'm going to play a brief 1-minute video, which I think you'll enjoy.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Could I ask what that tattoo is on your arm? It's just that it's a bit boring. It's a line of numbers.
Well, I was about your age when I got it, and I keep it as a reminder.
Oh, a reminder of happier days?
No. Of a time when the world went mad.
So you keep it to remind yourself.
No, my darling. To remind you.
Okay, so we're going to begin by starting with a little bit of a technology check. If you get knocked off, I will be watching the screen to admit you all the way through the program. Also, I want to tell you about how we're going to manage the program. We have quite a nice crowd building here, and we have more than one screen. So in order for me to be able to see you, I want you to be able to notify on the bottom where your toolbar is, there's a reactions button. So if you click on that reactions button and you raise your hand, if you look at my screen, you'll be able to see that there's a hand raised there, and that allows me to not only you to come forward into the first screen, but I can see that you have a question. When you finish the question, just hit the reactions button again and lower your hand like I'm doing right now. Also, as Yifat has joined us here for her presentation, and we'll have our second and third songs by Carla, you may have questions, and we're going to hold all questions to the end of the program. And we want to have you remember your questions. You can either write them down or you can put them into the chat. And if you want to click on the chat button here, you'll be able to see the chat is available to you. You may want to ask questions that are held later. Our artists may be putting information for you to know about chat. You'll see that I have put two or three notes already in there. So very good. And again, I apologize for any difficulty you may have had to get into the program today. The second half of our program is going to be a fun, interesting storytelling program. And as I said, many people are still coming in, for you to remember your parents with a short memory of how they helped you go from the darkness of the Holocaust into the light. So if you have a memory, jot it down, and we'll raise your hand, and we'll get you remembering about it. And so I also want to appropriately do the following and introduce Carla appropriately. And Carla has moved to the US from Brazil in 2004. And Carla is committed to keeping traditions, the culture, and the languages alive. The duality of our cultural background has influences in jazz, bossa nova, samba, classical opera, providing a unique sound that is only Carla's. She's a multicultural, multilingual singer, performing her repertoire in Portuguese, English, Spanish, Hebrew, and in Yiddish, along with Ladino, many of which appear on her latest album called Thankful. Carla's earliest musical memory came from her singing at Passover services with her grandfather, who was a cantor. Carla says people should have the space to express themselves according to the values and cultures in which they have been raised. Through music, she is able to honor her identity, her roots, and share her joy with all of you and many others. So Carla, I'm going to pass the program back to you for your second song.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for the beautiful introduction and including me in this program. Should I also do my candle now? I would like to light my candle. So beautiful from Israel. Actually, I haven't used, so I'm happy that this opportunity came up, and that reminds me. So I'm gonna light this in honor of the first Holocaust survivor that I met in Brazil when I was in school. I can't remember exactly how old I was, but obviously I had to do some project, and I went to his house. I did this interview, which was one of the most touchful like memories for me, and how I started obviously learning about all that. As so I want to honor him, even though I can't even recall his name now, and it's gonna make me go through a lot of materials to try find something. Like recently I found my grandfather's CD and doing some prayers that I'm very excited. So it's for him, and to our great also Dr. E from the book The Choice here in San Diego, the survivor. I am pleased to light this candle and put here. And now, so before I start my song, I just wanna, I think I said this. This is my first album that I recorded long ago, Thankful, when I do a little bit of each styles that I do. The song I'm gonna do now is the Hanukkah song that you can also find all this in any platforms. It's called Nis, which means miracle in Ladino. And today you might not understand the language, so later if you want to go to my YouTube channel, you can see this version has lyrics, translation, and a nice video clip that express the message behind it. That I think it was really a miracle that I did this, and I'm so pleased, and I want to honor and thank Rachel Bortnik, who probably have tried to get here and she couldn't. She is the founder of Ladino Comunidad, she's from Smir but live in Dallas, and she has been a great teacher, mentor for me in this. Can you hear?
Yep.
Nos topamos en tiempos de desespero. ¿A quién demandaremos? ¿En quién nos animamos? ¿Cuál oasis esta oscuridad? ¿Dónde está la luz? Cuando puedo abrir los ojos, solo veo la noche. Ay, encenderemos una candela y miraremos la luz que va brillando. Seguiremos a cantar. Llévame a la paz. Tómame la mano y nos sanaremos. The mystery revealed in the sweetness of a chord. Through our suffering, we see the value of our Lord. The Mysterie hat sich entpleckt mit dem Ebersten Sittkeit, als wir soll genießen dem Wert nach dem ganzen Weitig. Piensa en el milagro que afectó ahí la tierra, el fuego, la agua y el aire. Cantaremos más al fondo de nuestras almas. Milagros nos llevan a la alegría. התולה כבר נפטרה במתיקותו של הבורא. דרך סבלותינו נראית הנס. נס גדול היה פה, נס גדול היה פה, נס גדול היה שם, נס גדול היה שם.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you, thank you. I want to say that I gave a treat here because I went through I don't normally do that on a screen. I plan to release this song in the other languages. So in the chorus, you may have heard that I went through different languages. And I'm still working on, hopefully, since this is a song that's going to be every year for Hanukkah and for hope, for all we need, I'll be releasing in the different languages, God willing, every year. So keep in touch. So I don't know which language you guys like the most, and that will be a surprise. Thank you so much.
Okay, terrific. And I want to also acknowledge we have Ruth Lindemann with us, who is, and Ruth, if you don't mind, raise your hand here so we can all see you. And Ruth is another survivor who joins our programming frequently. And Ruth, I want to introduce you to Pavel and Vera, who are survivors as well from Auschwitz. And you can raise your hand, Pavel, and so she can see you on screen. And raise your hand, Pavel. So there you go. So
Oh, I can see him.
okay, very good.
Hello.
All right. And so we're
You're a
going
really
to now,
handsome guy. Okay.
we're going to now move to our speaker as part of our program. And I'm so happy to introduce Yifat. And let me tell you a little bit of Yifat's story, but I think she's the best to tell her biography and her father's. So her father is Thomas Geves. He wrote a memoir of sorts called The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz. And that's what the presentation that Yifat will be presenting on behalf of her father. Her father is still living, and they're both in Israel. A story about a past that's with powerful messages for the future. Thomas has documented the past and became an active witness out of a wish and hope for the testimony to raise people's awareness of the true events of the past in detail, their effect on people and the way people coped with them, some surviving against all odds. Learning about the past is a value of its own, but learning from it can teach us all about ourselves, about our present life. Thomas' testimony carries his hope and wish for people to learn from the past, live accordingly, and create a better future. So with that, I want to graciously, and I'm honored to have Yifat with us. And I want to personally thank Yifat for stepping in under such short notice to help me out today and have you all with us. So Yifat, I'm going to allow you to take the floor and make your introduction. So take it away.
I thank you so much, Jeffrey, for inviting us here to this forum of people with this sharing this interest. And it's very special for me that there are also Holocaust survivors here. And everyone is welcome to raise any questions. I think it's better in the end. But so thank you for having us, Jeffrey, for this opportunity. And it's a real shlichut. It's a thing that we feel it's our turn now. My father is well and healthy, but he lives in another town from me. And at this time of the day in Israel, it was too late for him to participate, but he's still active. Has been active for 30 years as a witness, and I'll tell you all about that very, very soon. Jeffrey, you asked me also to light candles in Israel. So I don't know if I can show it. Yeah, I think I can. Yeah, we usually light 3 candles in the Memorial Day in our family. It's still a bit before the Memorial Day in Israel, but we live that every day of the year. So, but still gathering together around this top thing, the memories, the sharing the memories. We have 3 candles because we light always 1 candle is to my mother's family. My mother, she's also a Holocaust survivor. She was sent in the age of 4 in the Kindentransport to Sweden. And her parents has been escaping for a year, but then they were caught and sent, and both perished in Auschwitz. and the rest of her family. And the other one is to my father's side, his family, my grandmother from his side as well, and other family members. And the third one is always the one for all the people who perished and did not have a lack of having a family or anyone else to light a candle. So that candle will be lit to all people to remember, to be remembered. And I think I will say a bit more in the end. We didn't have a chance to do the technical check, so I would like to share the screen, and I hope that everyone let me know if you see it properly. There will be 3 parts to this. Actually, it's Thomas' testimony, but I'm carrying it for today. And it will go through photos and drawings made by Thomas, and I will explain all about that as we go through the display. I think it's more interesting. So just spare with me for a second. I'll put it all on. And I need to share the screen. Jeffrey, I think you have to allow me to share the screen.
All right, here we go. You should be able to share the screen. Go ahead.
Yes, okay. I'll press the right place here, and it will take a second, I guess, to put it all on.
There we go. Here you go.
I think, but you can still see the whole thing, I think.
That's fine.
Okay. Now you see, now do you see the, I have to take off the top. Do you see like a gray thing on the top?
You're fine.
You don't see it?
No.
Good. So you see the whole
Yep.
screen. Good. Okay, so the name of this testimony is The Boy Who Drew Auschwitz. It is a testimony of Thomas Geves, and the name is after the new version of his testimony. It has been published before. I'll talk about that later, but the latest publication has been last year, in 2021, starting in the UK. But what you see here is the cover of the US version of the book. And the book is Thomas' written testimony and drawn testimony. I will go through everything and you will understand how things were done. As I said, Thomas has been an active witness for over 30 years and still is. And he's been talking to audiences, understanding. For many years, he did not do that. I'll explain it a bit later. But something have changed, and since the 80s, he started to be an active witness with all ages, and believing that that's his role to tell the story. Now it's up to us, next generation, to carry on the memories and the stories. So it's a bit of a background. The first one will be a background, and then we will hear about his story in the camp, and then I'll tell you a little bit about his life afterwards. So Thomas was born in Stettin. Those days it's been Germany. Nowadays it's Poland on the order. First son to his parents, Bertha and Eric. Eric was a doctor, and Bertha was a daughter of a doctor. So he's been in the family of doctors. Cute baby, suntan baby. The family had good relations. He had 2 aunts with very close relations with them as well. And the first year he's been, living a normal life, but quite soon, when the government have changed, being a Jew, a Jewish family in Germany, of course, they felt the meaning of the the Nazi regime, and things started to change. Being very young at those years, he didn't understand the full meaning of it, but of course he saw more things happening that he was not allowed to take part. He's been growing a lot around nature. You say that every step in your life is a bit of a preparation for what's to come, and everything that happened to Thomas in his younger life seemed if you look backwards, it seems like everything kind of prepared him for what is to come, the very unknown future, unbelievable future. But living in nature around animals and flowers, and that build up something in his character, you know, feeling that the world is an optimistic place, connected to nature, connected to the basic things, very friendly boy. In 35, things start to change with all the new rules that gradually build up. But the stricter rules for the Jews did not allow his father, being a doctor, to work anymore as a doctor when they were, and they had to move. They moved back to his father's hometown in 35 to Boyton. Boyton was a town on the border of Poland, and it was kind of a mixed town, which also allowed Thomas to absorb a bit of the Polish language, atmosphere, people. So that wasn't a strange culture to him. And also that would be very useful in the future for him. You see him, he was a very friendly boy, a naughty boy. He loved being with his friends, and that also would play a role for his survival later on in the camps. Here we see him on the first day of school in Germany. They have those tubes of candies with his friend, that's in Boyton, with his mother here. Very exciting days. He didn't have much of time to go to school, that when time became more and more rough. But those 2-3 years, he managed to go to the first school, the primary school, elementary school, taught him a little bit about culture, about life. He already felt that what is taught in school is not completely right, that the history and they had Jewish books, and they have German Nazi books as well that they were supposed to learn from. And he already felt that the people play around with the facts and the truth. And he didn't believe much of what he heard, and he started to build up his very individual character. I missed saying before, Thomas was a very curious boy. He loved technical stuff, as we see him playing with the train, and that also will play a role to his very unique testimony later on. His attention to details and memory to those things will play a very important thing. He already, 38, a huge change again, another stone of change in the Jewish life in Germany. That's the Kristallnacht by the end of 38. And of course that, because some Jews understood before that they should leave, but many believed that the can't be that bad and it must be a change, and they kept on hanging to their lives in Germany. But after 38, that was quite apparent that it's going to be a violent times. People were in danger of arrest, and his father and his family decided that they must make a change. The original plan was to go to Israel. His father was a Zionist, but it was impossible in Israel those times, still under the British laws, and did not allow immigration. And it was very hard to find at those times another place to immigrate to, because although his father was a doctor and was very needed thing, but there were also other immigrated before. So both his parents started to study other things that they might be needed for, and they actually got a visa in 39. Early 39, Thomas was sent to Berlin to join his grandparents who left to Berlin already a few years before. And his parents on those times started to prepare for the leave. First, his father left. The plan, he got a visa to England. Actually, his mother got one too, but Thomas did not have one. So she stayed with him. And the plan was that his father would go to England and settle there and draw Thomas and his mother from Berlin. but he left in the summer of 39, about July or August 39. And in September, the war broke and the borders were shut. And Thomas and his mother got stuck in Berlin and could not leave. They had a little bit of correspondence with his father. Very few letters came in. The last one who came in was in 1940 from through the Red Cross. He left a message that he's going on an island and never heard from again. They assumed he left to Australia, and they heard that many of those ships to Australia never arrived. And with time not hearing from him anymore, they were not sure if he's alive anymore, and no idea what happened to him at that stage. Thomas and his mother went up living in Berlin. Now time came rougher and more dangerous to do that as well. 1942, again, lots of changes. Jews have to carry the yellow star. Jewish schools are shut. The Jewish community, in order to help the teenager, they offer an option to volunteer work in all sorts of Jewish options. And Thomas went to work in the Jewish cemetery of Weissensee with other teenagers. But with time that year, more and more Jews started to disappear, and the shipment to the east started, and the liquidation of Jews in Berlin was more intensive. And these were the last Jews of Germany. And it became, Thomas and his mother actually were arrested as well once, and then earlier in 1943. Thomas was very creative and a brave guy. He had lots of street wisdom, and one of the things he knew already by then, that knowledge is power, and he has to take care of things, make decisions all the time, and be very, very active and think what the best to do all the time. So he had an idea after this arrest, and there was a committee. He went to the committee and he said, listen, I'm going to be needed because I can help in the cemetery. And that persuaded that committee to let him out and his mother. They thought they were brother and sister. They thought they were man and wife. They did not argue. They just let them both out. His mother worked in all sorts of factories, and Thomas worked in the cemetery, and that allowed them to keep on being in Berlin, first under legal certification, but later it became not too legal. So they kept on living for a few more months in Berlin, but then they did not have where to stay anymore. It became too dangerous. Now, Jews, of course, they knew that there were train and transport to the east. They did not know exactly what's on the east. They assumed they're going to be resettled and work hard. That's all they knew. For them, it seemed to be the right thing to do. They were used to hard work. They could not afford to stay anymore. So they actually gave themselves up. By June 1943, they were back to the detention camp in Berlin. And after a short while, they were sent to the east. They were sent on transport 39, one of the last to be sent out of Berlin, and not knowing where they're going. Thomas arriving, he writes in the book about the arrival, the journey and the train, understanding that they're leaving behind a world that is lost for them. He says, we were living a world that was lost for us and probably lost itself. And on that train ride, he started to understand that things are going to be very different, but not understanding at all where he's getting to. Arriving to the gates of Auschwitz by the end of June 1943, Thomas immediately at arrival is split from his mother, and for the next 22 months, he's going to spend 19 months in Auschwitz Men 1, being evacuated in January 45 on a death march, arriving to Gross-Rosen for a short while, and evacuated again by trains, arriving to Buchenwald. A few months later, he's liberated. In April 45, Buchenwald is liberated. Thomas, by the time he entered the Auschwitz, he's 13 years old. And by the time he's liberated, he's 15 years old. At that time, he sit down and drawing over 82 drawings, which I'll tell a bit more deeply later. But from this point on, we're gonna see Thomas' life in the camps through his own drawings, has been done freshly from his memory at liberation in Buchenwald on those 2 months after liberation, while very weak, but very fresh in his memory. So here we see Thomas' drawing of the gates of Birkenau. Arriving at those times in June 43, you can see that the train stopped outside the gates of Birkenau. It's called the Old Jews Ramp. Later on, trains started to enter the gates, and people went off the trains inside of Birkenau, but when he arrived, it was still out. And you can see here, this is the existing building of the entrance of Birkenau, and you can just see how faithful Thomas was to what he really saw, to details. He was really trying to keep every detail correct, and those drawings has been checked by historians, and the accuracy is very high. This is the first arrival drawing on the ramp, and I will let some of those drawings, you will hear Thomas explaining on his own, in his own words. I'll let Thomas be the speaker here.
Here at the arrival, that is the most historic picture I could ever imagine. How people arrived and sorted out who. Here at the arrival, that is the most historic picture I could ever imagine. How people arrived and sorted out who is being killed the same day. Children and invalids in the middle, as you see women for work on the top, in the middle women and invalids, and on the bottom men, sorted out by SS-men as they arrived. And of course all the luggage which they brought along, as you see historically, are left in the wagons and they never saw them again. This picture was recognized, and I'm very proud of it, at the Auschwitz Museum, and it was engraved on a memorial or a wall in Auschwitz, this picture and other pictures too. And I think this is a very important picture of history, not only Jews, but other people were killed in Auschwitz too.
Could you hear the sound, Jeffrey?
Yes, it was better when you made it louder.
I tried to see if I can do it louder for a second, sorry. I think that was the loudest I can do.
Don't worry, go ahead, don't worry about it. It's louder.
Okay. Okay, so that's, sorry, for the arrival, I will show you the arrow, so I hope you can follow the arrow when Thomas is explaining things. Thomas called this drawing the saddest scene of modern history, and I think he's right. How people have been split to life and death at arrival. This drawing, that shows us the process of becoming a prisoner. Here on the right, we see a citizen arriving, of course, the one has been chosen to life, and go through a process of becoming a prisoner. First, they take off all their clothes. Those clothes were packed and sent back to Germany as a loot and given to people. And people got their, first they got shaved, all hair was shaved. Of course, there was a sanitary thinking behind it, but of course it was more than that. It was taking off, the first step of taking off people's identity and power and strength and dignity, taking off all their hair. That was part of the process. And then there was a disinfection. And then there were showers. And then there were the uniform. And then came the tattoo and registration. As we know, the Germans are very strict with very set, and they have everything very registered and filed, all documents. At leaving, the rush of leaving Auschwitz at January, they tried to burn all evidence, but some have been left. And you can see we have quite a lot of documents about Thomas arriving to Auschwitz. Some of them were kept. One thing that Thomas noticed when he leaves that process, he looked at his arm. He has a number tattooed in his arm. The number is 127003. And being a very technical boy, he add up the numbers and he noticed they add up to 13. And he wonders whether 13 would be a lucky number for him. Of course it was. The two stories are short stories I like to tell here, because I forgot to say beforehand, we saw one of Thomas' photos from his childhood, one of his beloved Aunt Ruth. You could see her before. She told him when he was much younger, she told him, Thomas, everywhere you go, everywhere you will be, there would be bad people and there would be good people. Always remember that. And Thomas' testimony shows us so much of that. He experienced so much of that. But even in a concentration camp with so much cruelty, there were scenes of kindness and compassion and help. And Thomas, on his testimony, emphasized a lot of that. He does not ignore the rough things and the horrors and the death, but he points out life and the way people helped each other and acted in different ways. So two stories just to point that out. I think they're very special. One, that the people who did all that process were prisoners themselves. They were not allowed to speak to the newcomers. That was part of the horror. They wanted to hold everyone under horror and weak. Although they were not allowed to speak. Everything was done in silence or with very strict orders. But the guy who did the tattoo was a young prisoner himself. And when he did the tattoo to Thomas, he noticed he was very young. And I didn't mention that before. Okay, I'll mention it. He was very young, so he just looked up at his eyes and he said, "Good luck to you." One sentence, but that sentence gave Thomas some kind of feeling. Someone is caring about him, and he's not alone. The next story is after finished that process, they went through one day of arrival, one night in Birkenau. The next day they moved to Auschwitz Men Camp 1. But when Thomas is noticing at that, more or less at that time, that there are only men around him, and he was just 13. So being used to talk to SS officers in Berlin, he was not afraid, and he found an officer, and he went to that officer and he kind of straightened his back and knocked his heels, very politely, German manners. And he turned to that officer and said, "Sir, you have a mistake. I'm just a boy. Please move me to the place with the other boys. Send me to the place with the other boys." And that officer looks at him and he says, "Go back where you came from, and one day you thank me I didn't do that." Of course, at that point, Thomas doesn't know what it means. But only 24 hours later, meeting other prisoners, getting to know the real truth, he already understands that he's one of the lucky ones, because most youngsters under 15 were sent directly to death at arrival. People from 15 and above were thought to be strong enough to work, and they were sent to be a prisoner. Thomas was very tall because he worked in a cemetery. He was tall and suntanned and strong, and they assumed he was older. And at that point, no one corrected it, and that saved his life. Here we see some of Thomas' drawings. He had different kind of drawings. Some of those drawings are lists. He was listing things, some from his memory and some from documents that has been found in Buchenwald after liberation. Here we see a list, one of those lists of it's called the spider web, because the prisoners explained them that Auschwitz at that point was Birkenau, Auschwitz Men 1, there was Buna, and there were other satellite camps. Just a year later, they all became Auschwitz, Auschwitz 1, 2, 3, and on. But at that point, that was the spider web. So Auschwitz was not one camp, it was a web of many camps around the area. Some of Thomas' drawings are maps. Again, some of those maps has been copied from documents has been found after the liberation, but some of them has been drawn from his memory and also with the help of prisoners around him at that point that added information. So here we see one drawing of a map of Camp Auschwitz 1, a sketch of it, and the other postcard shows the explanation. What I didn't say, and I think it's important to understand, the drawings that we see has been done on a tiny miniature postcard that Thomas found left in the headquarters after liberation. The size of the drawing that we see here, the originals, are 10 on 15 centimeters, like really a small postcard. So it's really miniature, but very full of information. Here we see a very special project that's been in just a few camps. It's called the Bricklaying School, the Mauerschule. Maybe some of you heard of that. Not too many evidence from that stage because that was just for the youngest. Now the youngest at that point were usually 15 to 20, 15 to 18. Thomas was exceptionally young. He was one of the youngest probably ever been to the school. He was just 13. And I let Thomas speak here to explain a little bit.
Yeah, that's a bricklaying school, and that was an invention there where about 200 children were taught to lay bricks, and that saved their lives because they were sheltered and had easier work. And that I was received there. I was the third youngest at that time. Most of the other boys were gypsies and Russians.
Yes, in Auschwitz 1, the percentage of Jews was very low, not just like other camps. Thomas said that some of it out of 18,000 to 22,000 prisoners, depends when, in Auschwitz 1, usually there were about 10% of Jews. And there were times that even less. So not too many Jews around, but the bricklaying school, life in the bricklaying school with the younger prisoners was very different from the life outside with the grown-ups. The atmosphere between the youngsters was different, and Thomas explained a lot in his testimony about their life as teenagers in the camp. And one of the things, we'll not go into it but because of lack of time, but if you read the testimony, you will see a lot, very interesting explanation about their lives. One of the things that was very different with the youngsters, that they were very curious about the differences between them. We have to remember that there has been teenagers from around Europe, they're from lots of different countries, different languages, different cultures. With the grown-up camps, that was a very problematic thing. There were lots of suspicious between people and hostility between people and prejudice. But the youngsters were more open and more curious about each other and to learn each other's behaviors, songs, games, even behaviors. And they tend to help more each other to connect. And that was very typical to the younger prisoners.
Yeah, that's a bricklaying school.
So, as we said, as Thomas explained, he was a bricklayer. A bricklayer was a very unique role in the camp. Here we see Thomas drew different jobs, different things that they did. He was usually using a shovel and building, laying bricks. That idea that he was a bricklayer allowed him few unique positions that made his testimony very unique later on, because he saw a lot. There were people who had the same job every day. They were set in a certain role or job, and they did what they did the same day every time. And they were not allowed to wander around the camp. Things were very, very strict. But as a bricklayer, first he was part of different groups and he did different jobs with time. So he went quite a lot around the camp and sometimes even outside the camp. So that allowed him a very wide perspective about life in the camp. He saw quite a lot of scenes and places. And also he met many different people, because each group, working group, was different prisoners, and he was there for 19 months. That's a long time, much longer than the average life of 3 to 6 months. That's what the expected average life expectancy. But Thomas was there for longer, so he met different kind of people from different cultures and countries. He also saw he was also sometimes working with civilians, and that was very unique as well, because that sometimes they helped them with some food if they, of course, they risked their life for that, but they did it sometimes. And also with information. People were the thirst to know what's going on. They were kept ignorant in the camp, but there was always somehow people who managed to get information. And Thomas, being young, also people trusted him more, so they shared sometimes the information and even secret with him, and that was also allowed him to get more information. I look at the time. I'll move a bit forward here. Here we see a daily routine, and waking up at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, going out to work, a working day of 11 hours labor work, very hard work, 1 hour break in the middle for lunch, and then coming back in the evening, settling. That was time to organize and try to get extra food or meet people, take care of things, and going very early to bed and starting the next morning.
Yifat, takes as much time as you need.
Okay, thank you. Here we see another kind of list. Was very interesting here. Thomas listed different kind of jobs that he knew about in Auschwitz. One, working groups. So there were factories like the Union factory. He knew that his mother was working there for a while as well. People were sent to different groups, and here he wrote, what was the name of the group, how many people were there, how many workers, male or female, and more or less what they did. There were lots of mining and other works as well. As I said, Thomas used to be in the building commanders usually. Here Thomas drew the hierarchy of prisoners. In Auschwitz, most of the inside affairs of the camp were taken care of by prisoners in a different hierarchy of roles. And the SS were more guarding, and the officers came in just to check things and counting, but most of the inside life were taken care of by prisoners. Of course, being a Jew, there's not chance to get any of those. In Auschwitz I, it was different in other camps, but in Auschwitz I, the highest role a Jew could be was a working, the one who's in charge of the working group. But the others were taken up by Jews, usually not in Auschwitz I. But we see the different titles, capos, sub-capos, and others. This is a very special drawing of Thomas. I'll let him explain here.
And this is very warm to my heart, because it shows all my comrades, fellow prisoners lined up at night. Why? If somebody was missing, we had to stand for hours till they found out he may have fallen asleep, he may have died somewhere, or we don't know. So we had to stand there. And of course, people say, you see the block elder in blue, yes. And then you see the SS man, and people say, yes, I drew them big because I was afraid of the SS. I wasn't afraid. Some SS men were smaller. I was taller than some of the SS men anyhow. So I wanted to show his equipment, his boots, his revolver, his stick, his cap, and all this I wanted to show how it was, the camp guards, SS guards.
Yes, Thomas explained more of this drawing, but the roll calls was a very known thing in Auschwitz a few times a day. Doesn't matter if the sun was up or the snow was hitting or winds or rain or whatever. We're talking about Poland, so imagine the winter roll calls where he explained how they were leaving, there were holes where people stood and all around them was snow. Very rough times. Usually the room elder was counting everyone, but if the numbers did not add up, then they had to tell the officers and they came in. Now, sometimes the officers just came in for their sadistic interests. And there were many very amazing stories about those roll calls in his testimony. But one that I wanted to share, which I find amazing, imagine people who were hardly alive at that point, starving, weak, wounded, barely alive, keeping themselves alive. And still they saw that when the officers came in and started to torture people. So they funded an idea. I think it was also meant by the block elder as well. They put the strongest guys around and the weakest people in the middle. So when the officers start to abuse them, he would not get into the inside roads and just mess up with the strongest one. And they kind of protected each other. And I find it amazing that they did that. But it didn't help for long because they figured out that the officers and they started to go into the roles as well. And another amazing thing, you know, I remind you that this drawing, the size of this drawing is a tiny little postcard, and these are really miniature people. Now you can imagine when a person is tired and exhausted, as Thomas was when he drew those drawings at the end of the war, you would think he would probably do some kind of a sketch or do the lines or everyone the same, more or less the same heads, shoulders. But if you look carefully, every prisoner is different and it was done on purpose. And I think that was one of Thomas' way, you know, the idea of drawing was he was able to give individual character to each of his friends. And that was one of his way to show the victory of the mind and the spirit over the body and the victory over the plan of the German to illuminate their identities. So that was his shown of strength and power when he drew each one individual. And I think that's very powerful. Here he drew the disease, the vermins. There were different vermins, and that was very, very dangerous. You know, nowadays you have soap, you have something to do about it, but if you caught that in a camp and it was very crowded camps, people were sometimes 10 people sleeping in the same bank, very tight. In Auschwitz, they had blankets and they were full of those vermins. And when they got under your skin, they start to make infections and diseases. And it was very, very dangerous. Many people died just because of those infections. Thomas, being a veteran with time, he knew how to kind of take those off and catch them very early and save himself. But even that was a quality you had to know in a camp. Here we see a very interesting comparison. Thomas loved those measurements and lists. He is a very technical guy up to this day. But here we see an amazing historical evidence. Thomas is comparing a list of the daily amount of food they got in Auschwitz and in Birkenau. He compared those two. And you actually see that the so little food they got in Auschwitz in 43, 44, arriving to Buchenwald in 45 toward the end of the war, the amount was even less, almost half of what they got. So there were hardly any food in those last few months. In Buchenwald was not expecting that much of prisoners that arrived, escaping towards the west. So here we see a daily amount of food, which is 350 grams of bread, 1 liter of very, very watery soup, a little bit of margarine, sometimes a spoon of jam, a bit of sausage. That was they were living. And as Thomas said, people were not expected to live over 3 to 6 months, and they were too weak, sent to their death and exchanged by other new prisoners that kept on coming all the way through. People could not live on that alone, and they had to organize extra food. Here we see the way they were cooking, huge tanks of the soup. And then there was an issue of delivery of the food to the prisoners, to the groups. There were different kinds of working groups, and each working group have a different way of carrying the food. Carrying the food was a dangerous role as its own. It was very heavy. Sometimes you fell, and everything was, if you it was spoiled, then no one got their food. Very stressful also thing just to fetch the food and get the food in time. Hunger. Thomas Tassin will talk a lot about the coping with hunger and how people manage to do different things. But here we see like an idea of what they managed to organize. Everything was good enough to eat. Here we see rotten cabbage. We see peels of vegetables found in the garbage. This is the kitchen of Auschwitz, and it still exists up to this day. It was kept. And on the garbage pile, the prisoners tried to get some food, but then they were chased away. Horseradish, food for the horse. Rotten food that people brought on the train. There was sometimes leftovers. Everything would be counted as food. Another dangerous event in life in camp in Auschwitz was the selections. Every couple of months they had a selection. Thomas went through a few of them. Very dangerous times. So let Thomas explain here.
And this is the most dangerous situation. Twice a year they had a selection. And that didn't matter whether we are Jewish, Gypsy, Russian, or Christian German, or Polish Christian. Didn't matter what origin you were, you had to run naked. And now it's very interesting historical. If you had any wounds on the Körper from working with bricks, maybe wounds, or any exams or any other, or you limped or you didn't walk along, and even what is historically important, people don't know that, even if you wore glasses on your head, you were sorted out to be killed. And here, as you see, these people don't walk home, they run home because they're afraid the SS man may open the door and says, "You little guy, come back again, how old are you?" They could do that. Yes, that's a very dangerous situation. I went through about 3 of these situations.
Yeah, there was one very touching story from Thomas. He tells there were the newcomers that had no idea what it's about. So they all, the older one, the veterans, the people who were veterans by that point, they helped the newcomers to understand, you know, don't limp and take off this and that, and try to help them take off your glasses and things like that, that they might help them to survive this procedure of selection.
And
this is a very powerful drawing. Thomas drew the main dangers and horrors of the camp. So here we see the bunker that we know it was very known punishment. When Thomas drew, he knew only of that kind of bunker, but there were others that people was so small that people had to stand up, and they usually did not come out of those places. The heating, there were Thomas tells a lot about the punishments of hitting with a stick. If you get like 25, you might survive, but if you get 50 or 100, usually you don't survive these. The disease, of course, there was a hospital there. Being a Jew, there was not much chance that you get to a hospital and live through it, but he was actually hospitalized twice. And we think people helped him out there and might even hid his identity to survive the hospital. Crematorium, of course, that everyone knew that where the end of the road is there, sometimes because you just perished, and sometimes they were just sent there for different reasons. Here we see Thomas. First, he had a good knowledge of languages. He was catching quite a lot. He knew German, and he knew English, and he knew Polish, and he knew a bit of Russian, and he kind of communicated a lot with people. But he was also very friendly and he treated everyone as human beings. He didn't mind who they were and what their history was. And that allowed him to get friendly with many kind of people and many characters and many people from different nations. But one of the things that makes this testimony is unique, that Thomas, he says, I was like a journalist. He felt like he was a journalist that explains everything he saw. He did not talk about his own private life only, that it is there, but he looked around him. He paid attention to everyone and everything. So in his testimony, you can see the story of many different people from different cultures and countries. And here we see an example of two cultures that he paid attention to. One was the Gypsies. Thomas was very fond with the Gypsies. He already knew Gypsies from Berlin, and they were very close clans, but they funded him as well. So they shared a lot with him. There are lots of conversation in his book, talking to different people, and the Gypsies share their secrets and unique lives as well, and thoughts. And here we see the families of Gypsies arriving. They were first in Birkenau, and they were arriving to Auschwitz I, and Thomas drew that day when they arrived. And here we see the Jehovah Witness. They used to be called the investigator of the Bible. And the women there were very loyal to their masters, and they were held, many of them, to be house workers, helping the SS officers. And some meetings with those women, they tried to help especially the young prisoners. So he talks about their life as well. And that's a group, not a lot of information about them, but other groups as well. This is another unique thing at Thomas' testimony. Thomas, I forgot to tell that before, but his aunt was a music teacher, and he loved music as a young boy. And in the camp, apparently, the role of music was very, very strong. Thomas talks a lot about that. There are lots of testimony about songs they used to sing, the song they did not like to sing. They were forced to sing some of them they chose. There was an orchestra in Auschwitz, a very known thing. They used to play for the people who went out to work in the morning. Thomas did not see them, did not remember all this drawing was made later on at his recovery in Switzerland, because he wanted to open an encyclopedia and look for the different instruments so he can draw them well. That's how he was, what he really wanted to be accurate. So he looked for those instruments, but he heard the music later on in Birkenau. In Buchenwald, there was a choir of prisoners and other things. So the role of music was very powerful. Here we see one song. Thomas talked about the Moorsoldaten, the Mule soldiers, very known song, a very powerful song that they loved to sing because it kept their spirits up. And in the testimony, there's a lot about the role of music. One of the things Thomas says, that when they heard the music, they all felt equal. Music did not have boundaries. Music did not have limitations. And on Sundays, orchestra was playing to the families of the SS on the other side of the fence, but the prisoners heard the music as well, and it helped them to dream on and feeling normal for a moment, hearing that music. And of course, the orchestra sometimes kept a very certain music to keep the morale up. Here we see how, you know, to remind us, Thomas went through very mature life in the camp, but he was still a boy. And after liberation, one of his sketches was the ABC of an Auschwitzer, the words that follow his life, these 22 months in camps. Words like appel, block, capo, number, offense, and so and so. I know, Jeffrey, that you funded this educational idea, your project here, and you explained, you know, that one of the ideas behind it is the education. And Thomas' testimony is one of a very special testimony that can appeal to the younger generation. And many times we give the testimony to the younger students. And this is one of, for instance, you know, we let them write their own ABC of their life before they see it. And then we ask them, you know, would you like to know the ABC of Thomas' life in a camp? And this is a difference. And that's very powerful. Here we see the thing. Sorry, Jeffrey.
Thank you for sharing that story.
This is a famous scene of the evacuation of Auschwitz. You see down here the date. It says the 10th of January, but Thomas nowadays is not sure he was right with the date. It might be 18th of January. They lost track of time. So, but it was January definitely when the evacuation of Auschwitz was done, when the Germans understood that they're gonna, the Russians are arriving, or the Americans, the Russians on that point, and they evacuated the prisoners to the west. They thought they'd be able to hide everything that happened there, but they were rushing out, and they did not. Here on the left, we see how they burned everything, and they tried to destroy all evidence. But as Thomas says, you can't hide the truth, and they did not manage to hide the truth. And the documents that were left, people were left, the weak and the people and the sick people were left behind to bear witness afterwards. And also, very interestingly, as I said before, some documents from Auschwitz were found later on in Buchenwald. And that is very interesting because they were not supposed to survive. And apparently, probably, some SS officers took some of those documents illegally and carried those documents with them. We don't know why, but we can assume they either wanted to keep the documentary or maybe to bear witness themselves. They left Buchenwald on a rush and escaped, but the prisoners found those documents.
And this is also very more memorable. It's not the exodus of the Jews. Of course, the percentage of Jews in the camp, which I was camp number 1 in Auschwitz, were less than 10%, sometimes even 2%, most other people. Now you're the exodus out of Auschwitz, and you see everybody is carrying something. And then people ask me in schools, I've been for 20 years, I've been moving about the schools all over Europe. Who is me? I didn't think about this me. And of course, it's the little one on the bottom who's got no luggage and no blankets tied to him. That is me, or supposed to be. And then very historically important also for me, on the bottom you see a real fire and it looks real, and a block elder supervising it, and then even an S-man stands by to see that all the documents of Auschwitz are being burned. Well, I have drawn everything, my things are alive and kicking everywhere, so that there was no burning the documents in it. Yeah, but here we get provisions for the long exodus all the way to Buchenwald.
Here, Thomas draws the death march, They've been unbelievably marching for, we don't know exactly how long, but probably a couple of days, maybe a bit more, 60 kilometers walk in the snow, mainly at night. Later on, they were on a train, put on train, but open wagon train. Many people froze. But on the march, you will see, I'll let Thomas speak for a moment, and then I want to show you something.
Here, that's very impressive too. You see at night, you see people in open railway carriages. And one of my bad jokes when I go to class, it's only a boy who could have drawn the engine, the locomotive, as accurately as I have drawn it, detailed locomotive out at night. And here, of course, snow, I couldn't draw snow. So these yellow flakes of snow, and out at night, we are marching out all the way for 2 days, and then go on by rail to Auschwitz and then to Buchenwald. Yes, you see somebody's picking somebody up in his back. That may be, as an engineer, I must explain, that may be a brother or something, or the father. As people were very thin, some didn't weigh more than 25 kilos. Well, if he could at work carry sacks of cement which weighed 50 kilos, we could carry a comrade on the long march on our backs, and we did this sometimes.
Yeah, this is one of the amazing scenes that people hardly bury themselves and they carry others. Sometimes they were relatives, but sometimes they were just friends. And even Thomas himself, being as young as he was, there were people keep on leaning on his shoulders on the march.
And here, that's very.
Okay, they were arriving to Crossroads in a very dangerous camp. Luckily for a short time, because very hard to survive there, and been evacuated again, this time to Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a different camp. It was a camp inside Germany, mainly political prisoners. And here there was a very active underground of prisoners. And Thomas felt from the arrival that they take care of each other, and he felt more safe there. But still it was very rough, and because of also the food was very lack of food. Here's one, the camp police was a very unique thing to Buchenwald.
The prisoners' police was something special which only was in the concentration camp of Buchenwald. They were called Lagerschutz, Schmira aller Lagerschutz, that means something protect in the camp. And that was a very special institution because it had reasons. Buchenwald was a very big camp, large camp, and at night they wanted to protect the prisoners from each other and protect the different storerooms from being robbed and stolen. So at night they had large patrols of this police, camp police, and that was very unique. And they helped the underground for information, and in the uprising they were also very active, and that was a very special force, unique for Buchenwald.
One of the amazing stories about this underground that just a bit before liberation, the days before liberation, they started to evacuate people again to the death and more death march, mainly the Jews. And the underground, first of all, they moved the boys, the teenagers, into a special block, block 66. Thomas was moved there as well later on. And when they started to evacuate, they gave all the Jewish boys new patches of, everyone had their patch, so they knew who's Jewish. They changed, the underground brought that block, the block elder, a pile of new patches, and they changed all the boys. So no one knew who was Jewish. And they saved lots of the youngest lives, including Thomas. And he was also hiding, and the underground really helped them there. This is a very unique, very special drawing. Again, it's a drawing of the scene of liberation. I'll let Thomas speak. This is one of the last drawings.
And here the famous scene, historic scenes, liberation of Buchenwald, and there are 6 different versions of the liberation, and only one is true. The moment the 3 American tanks on the left with the American flag very historically drawn, they actually came on this side of the camp. That's the main entrance of the camp. There was a revolt, and we had 200 people with arms, and we stormed the camp. We drew out the camp guards. And my own theory of the liberation is completely different to official ones. We had, as you see on top, we had captured 1 machine gun that was hidden. For 1 year, it was hidden under the floor. And when we started shooting with a machine gun, I reckon that the guards thought the Americans are shooting inside. They never figured out that the prisoners have a machine gun. So they thought the Americans have arrived inside the camp, and most of them fled. That was a real story of the liberation. As you see, these men here, an SS man with his arms up, and another arm also arms up. He tried to hide himself by putting blue prisoners. They said, take off your jacket, and they had SS uniform. And some of it only had whips. They didn't have all rifles. And as you see, very accurately, the rifle, I'm very proud of. You see, the rifle is aimed exactly onto the man, and he's shaking the rifle. It's a very historic picture.
There were different versions of the liberation of Buchenwald, and many years it mistakenly was said that it was liberated by the Americans. But actually the Americans went through Buchenwald, but they were not exactly understanding what's going on there. And the moment of liberation was actually self-liberated by the underground. There's a very interesting guy named Georges Buchemins. He wrote a whole book last year. It's been in French, but it's going to be in English soon, just about the day of liberation. Amazing things happen on that day from the outside forces, different allies forces, and from the inside forces, inside underground. Amazing human story, what happened there. So you can read more in the testimony. That is a day after, a few hours after, depends where in the camps, but the American arrived a bit later. And here Thomas is drawing how they actually entered the camp and saw all the horrors of that camp. And they brought cameras. They understood that they have to document everything. And they had missions coming of civilians and officers from America, and they filmed everything, and the prisoners took them around and explained to them what's happening in the camp, and it was very well documented after liberation. But Thomas show us here how the American soldier was so different from the German soldiers, being so free and smoking and friendly and talkative, and just the opposite, freeing everyone. And here is the last scene we chose to this display. There are over 80 drawings, but here we see a very important the last roll call in Buchenwald. They call it the roll call of nation. After it was before the end of the war. The war ended officially the 8th of May. That was the 1st of May march. Thomas will talk here.
And then on the 1st of May, the big march passed, and I was with the German. I was a German column, and some columns were very big in nations. German column. I held up a poster and I marched past the off here. You've got the flags of Britain and the States, and Russia with Stalin on it, Roosevelt on it, Churchill on it. We marched past, and then the camera was turned on me, and that was something very, very moving. These photos got lost, the camera, all these films got lost, but I was marching there, very proud, first of all.
Yeah, just to, okay.
And then?
Okay, so that was the sign of liberation. Here we see the different nations that was left, survivors left from each nation carrying their own flags, and there were flags that were no one left from that nation. Thomas was carrying one of these flags behind no one was was surviving. So Thomas Buchenwald is liberated on 11th of April, as we saw before. But then it takes time until they figure out what to do with all the survivors. First of all, many of them were in very bad shape. Many died after liberation. They could not, some of them did not have anywhere to go. They lost their families, their nationalities and everything. So it took time. Thomas talked in his testimony about that time. Here we see from block 66, the teenagers block. Here we see some of the teenagers that survived after liberation. Thomas is not here, but he was one of these boys, teenagers, in very bad shape. He could hardly walk at that stage, very weak. He was moved after liberation. They split the people into blocks through their nationalities and languages. So Thomas, after liberation, was sent to block 29, where the German speakers were. And there, many of the underground members were there. And one of them was a man called Eugen Kogan. And he is, maybe I'm not expressing his name right, but he was a known historian. And the Americans knew of him, and they asked him and his other members of the underground after liberation to collect all the information from the headquarters and the dorms of the SS officers who flew away, who escaped, and they left behind all the documents. So they were to collect all those documents, mainly in German, of course, and they were supposed to put them on in order and help the Americans to set up all that information. Now, all those guys were in Thomas' block. So during the day, they were collecting information. There was one single table on the block, and they piled all those papers on the table. And Thomas was in the block, he couldn't move around, and he sat on the same table, and they got those postcards, as I said, the tiny little postcard. They were SS forms. On one side, they had a acrostica and everything. On the other side, they were blank. So Thomas took those postcards. First, he had just bits of tips of pencils. Later on, he got some colored pencils, and later also watercolor. So he started to sit down and draw. Now, he drew his experiences. He drew scenes from life, as you saw today, lists and maps, some based on information that his friends in his blog found. So they're very accurate, they're just copied from official documents. Some were from his own memory and prisoners around him who shared their information, like lists and names of working groups and so. Here was Thomas drew over 80 drawings, but with time, some of them were lost. And here on the left, we see one drawing that was actually lost. And Yad Vashem got a diary of a lady who took care of Thomas later, and she copied that drawing. So through her journal, diary, we found another drawing. And actually, it's an amazing one because that's the only one that Thomas has his own identity on it. It's his own real number, 127003. All the rest of his drawings were general, and he's not in the drawings, he drew what he saw. With the youngsters, there was a project. The Swiss government invited Jewish teenagers. They thought they were children, but there were hardly any children left, mainly teenagers. They invited them to Switzerland to recover. So in June 45, Thomas is leaving in one of those trains through France and then to Switzerland. And here we see the boys going on that train. And he arrived to Switzerland, first to Rheinfeldel for some quarantine, and he gets very ill in the quarantine. And later on, he gets to a boarding school in Zugerberg with other 100 and so boys and girls. Here we see other boys, but here, that's an historical picture because here we can see Thomas. You see him here on the right, on the top. Now you see Thomas is hugging his friends. I said Thomas was very friendly. And that was partially, I guess, as well. He had good friends there, but he also was too weak to stand on his own. He needed to be supported by others in order to be able to walk. It took him a good year to recover from the camps, from his weakness in the camp. But here we see him a bit stronger, and he was spending his time for those 6 months. And then thanks to the Red Cross, his father was found him, they found each other. His father was found in England, and apparently he did not leave England. He just left to the Isle of Wight. He was a surgeon in the English army as a doctor, and he served there. After the war was finished, they managed to find each other. And Thomas thought he would join his father for his 16th birthday, but he didn't have any passport, so it took some time. But what happened in his 16th birthday, he got a very special present from a adopting family he had in Rheinfelden. And they gave him chocolate, and they gave him a good sweater, and they took all his drawings and put them all in an album. And for Thomas, that was the most amazing present, because he felt that for the first time, his life is packed and collected, and he has a first possession of his own drawings. In November, he joins his father in London. He becomes an English guy. He goes to his studies. He has to finish to catch the gap of education. For many years, he did not go to school, but he does that very quickly, very brightly. In 1946, the first time a journalist paid attention to his drawings, and he asked him to write a few words about each drawing. And they make an article about him in the English newspaper. By that time, Thomas is still having his birth name. I did not mention it, but Thomas Geves is a pseudonym. He gave himself this pseudonym in 1946, the first time he was interviewed to a journal. And he figured out he didn't want his friends to know of his past. He didn't want anyone to judge him. And in those years, people were suspicious about Holocaust survivors. They did not know what they'd been through, what have they done to survive. There were lots of rumors, lots of prejudice about that. And he thought he has to go on with his life, and he can't be famous. He doesn't want to be famous. He wants to keep his privacy. So he decided to give himself a pseudonym about his history. So the boy from the Holocaust became Thomas Geves. Thomas Geves is very much of Thomas' identity up to this day, because that he was just 16. So Thomas Geves is him, but he kept on his real name for his future life. And I think that's very interesting, because many Holocaust survivors did the opposite. They changed a new name after they wanted to leave the past behind. But Thomas, I think, wanted to keep his real life. He felt his real life was his born name, the life he knew before the war. And he wanted to keep the life of the Holocaust under pseudonym, and to be part of the past and go on living his real name. So he finished his final exams, and he had to pick an occupation. And Thomas, as I said,
I'm sorry, Yifat, we want to make sure that we have time for you to be asked questions. So I don't know if you're at a good place where you can sort of wrap up.
Yeah, I would wrap up in 3 minutes, okay?
Yep.
I'll do that. Sorry. Yes. Anyway, Thomas finishes again. He decided to become a building engineer. That would play a role later in his life. And in 1950, he has the best surprise of his life. His father, they find out that his mother perished in the camps, did not survive the Holocaust. And a bit later, his father is remarried. And Thomas got a present to his 20th birthday, a baby sister, Judith, and become a big brother. And being that, he decided that his life cannot be in England. He wanted to be part of the new Jewish state. And he decided that his father now has another child and he can leave him. And he is leaving to Israel. In the 1950, he leaves to Israel. he became a building engineer. He takes part of building Israel, the new state. He is becoming an officer in the army, also using his skills as an engineer. So the skills of the boy from Auschwitz, being a bricklayer, became his life role later on. He marries, gets 3 children, 9 grandchildren, 1 great-granddaughter, and that's his sister Judith. His first testimony comes out just in writing in 1958, one of the first book out of testimonies, 1958, Youth in Chains. Later on in 81, the big event of gathering of Holocaust survivors. Up to that time, no one knows of Thomas' history, none of his friends. But in that gathering, he finds one of his friends from the camps that he wrote about, Gert. And he reads the book and he tells Thomas, every word you wrote is true. That was our lives. And from that moment, Thomas understands that his role is to be the storyteller for all his friends who perished. And in 85, the book comes out again with some of his drawings. In 97, the book with all of his drawings in Buchenwald, as well as a documentary film. And since then, Thomas goes around Europe for over 20 years, or almost 30 years around Europe, talking to students, schools, people, thousands of people in schools, telling about the history, and become an active witness. The newest book now republished again, thanks to our dear friend Charles Ingerfield, another journalist who found Thomas. As a whole story. I don't have time, maybe in the questions, be happy to tell you about how Charlie found Thomas. Thanks to him, the testimony is out again, this time with 56 of Thomas' drawings. This is the US version. This is the UK last version, and this year it came out again in a pocket version with few amendments, few changes that we found in the text again, just to keep it to the original, loyal to the original. This is Thomas' email and website. We are renewing his website. Soon you're going to be able to see all of his drawings in the website with explanations. But everyone is welcome to write and ask questions, and Thomas is very happy to share. And just leave Thomas to say last words, and then we can go to questions.
Ask me if I'm happy about my new book. Well, there's nothing happy about the past, but it is good that the 40 prisoners who helped me to survive 2 years of concentration camps have all become alive again. All Dear listeners, in April 1945, when I was liberated from the camp Buchenwald at the age of 15, I decided to document what I saw and experienced during 2 years, together with my friends at the camps of Auschwitz, Groß-Rosen, and Buchenwald, in a set of over 80 drawings, lists, and maps. 2 years later, I started also to write. From the years of 90, I am active as witness and tell about the past. I'm asked why I did this. I chose to record and tell about the past because it is important for me and also those that were not there could learn about the past and know exactly what happened. To remember the past and learn from the past. To be active accordingly and do good. Thomas Geves.
Wow. Let me step in here. This is, we all need to take a wow breath. Fantastic. I'm so happy that you could present to us your father, his life, and the way that you've presented it is amazing. I want to give everyone an opportunity just to take a breath. And I want to hold off questions for a minute. We will go long. If you need to leave at noon, we'll understand you. But my programs never end on time anyway. So I want to pass the program back to Carla. And I think Carla's choice of what she's about to sing is so apropos to your presentation without any planning. So kudos to you, Carla. And I'm going to turn the program back to you for your third song.
Hello, thank you for this. It's so amazing to hear this story. I am moved, definitely. So I've chose the song Amen. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Okay, some people said I don't have control of how people hear. I did my best with the sound system that Zoom is not the best, but thank you so much. So we're gonna conclude with that, and I dedicate this song for healthcare providers that we always have to be thankful for at those times. And after this, I am going to go to Brazil and produce my next song, which is also a prayer. So thank you, everybody. Let's see. בתפילה אמן, שעולם אמן, כל הנשמה תחלליה אמן, ותן ברכת שלום ושמור על ביתנו, קרב אותנו לחלום שבתוכנו, תן תמיד ברכה במעשה ידינו, פתח ליבנו שתמיד נשיר לך. אלוהי אמן, תכבותי אמן, עטוף אותנו באהבה אמן, תן לנו חיים ושמור עלינו, תן שתתגשם אהבתנו, תן לנו ברכה האר פנינו, פתח ליבנו שתמיד נשיר לך. לעולם אמן, לכולם אמן, הזכת רוח האדם אמן, לאמן, לעולם אמן, כל הנשמה תחלליה אמן, כל הנשמה תחלליה
Very nice, very nice. Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to open the discussion for questions for anybody. And if you can raise your hand, I can see you now. We're all on one screen. So I think, Pavel, you had your hand raised here. I don't know if you still want to contribute or you want me to go on to someone else. You have to unmute yourself, Pavel, please. You have to Try to unmute yourself, okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Well, I am a survivor. I'm a living survivor. You don't have many left, you know. I'm one of those. So my memory goes to 1943, that I was 6 years old. And I was sitting with my parents at the breakfast. It was before I went to camp. And still I remember I had my yellow star, David star, always wearing when I went outside. And I went in transport in 1943, transport DK, we call it DK, it's DK. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I went to transport DK. I was DK 11. That was my number. It's always I was remembered by my DK 11. That was me. And I remember when we came to Terezin, I lived in an attic. So I stayed all my 2 years in attic, but I think it was okay. And I would like you all remember my best friend. Her name was Hannah Benesh. Hannah Benesh. She ended up in 1944. She went to Ossetia and never made it. She went to Kasher. She was 70 years old. Sorry.
It's okay. We understand. If anybody understands, we understand.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else wants to raise their hand?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara, go ahead.
This is a question for Yifat. What I'm wondering is, how did your father's experiences affect you, and when did he start talking to you about it, and was that helpful?
Our hearts with you, Pavel.
Pardon me.
Our hearts is with you, and thank you for sharing. And we remember every name, every person, forever. And for your question,
Yeah, I remember another good friend with Rafael Sommer, Stepan Sommer. His mom was Mrs. Sommerherz, and she was the piano player there. And he was my best friend there. And I remember those people. And then I like Misha Lauscher. She is still alive, and she lives in Prague. I don't know if you heard.
Well, I need to give Yifat an opportunity to answer the question. Thank you. I need to give Yifat an opportunity.
yeah, I will answer the question. I just wanted to mention to Pavel, I'm sure you know, but Yad Vashem collect all names, and an opportunity to give every person we knew a name to be remembered forever in Yad Vashem. So you can always pass those names, and they collect those names for memory. For the questions, my father never talked directly to us. We knew, of course, he was a Holocaust survivor. We lived through that. From time to time, my mother shared a little bit of stories, but he didn't share those stories when I was younger. But we knew he wrote a book. So the first time I got acquainted to more of the story, when I was old enough to read the book, it was written in English. So I was 20 or 21 by the time I hardly had enough English to read it. I had used a dictionary and more or less understood through the book. But 8 years ago was the first time ever he allowed me to join him on his tours. He always went on his own to his tours. He took care of all of his testimony issues. He didn't want anyone to be involved. He really separated that life from his life here. But 8 years ago, that have changed. For the first time, he allowed me to join him, and that made a huge change because I became his partner, and he started to share more. And then we started all sorts of projects together, this book and others. And up to this day, I keep on studying about his, more and more information comes out. Every conversation we have, every time we go through a drawing, still more things are coming out, and I still learn from him. So it's a process, it's ongoing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rona, nice to see you, Rona.
Hi, thank you. You know, I loved his drawing, the one that he, with the flashlight, that he represented the light by showing the darkness behind. I'm wondering, Yifat, do you have talent in art? And also, when does he, I know probably now that I learned of his profession, but so does he draw regularly? Like now, is he still drawing? And what is he drawing today? And where are all these 80 drawings kept?
So the drawings are all kept, he donated them all in 85 to Yad Vashem. They're all kept under safe and special humidity because they're very gentle. So they will be kept in Yad Vashem. And he never drew before and never drew after. The only time in his life he drew were those drawings. But amazing things that I see it, you know, in those days, no one thought of drawings or art therapy. But when he arrived to Switzerland, they found those about those drawings. He hid them in the beginning, but then he showed a friend, and then the teachers saw it, and they thought it's an amazing idea, and they encouraged all the other boys arriving to draw their own experiences. Some of them took Thomas' drawings and asked him to copy, and some drew their own drawings. And up to this day, we keep on finding copies of people who copied his drawing, but you can see it's in different style, but it's the same scenario. So you can see, and Thomas hid his initials, his real initials, in every drawing. So some of them even copied that, they didn't know what it is. So it's interesting. But that keeps, you know, I think it's an amazing thing that just by his decision to draw those drawings to his father as a testimony to his father, how much it could help others to do the same. And nowadays we know the amazing role of art therapy. And myself, yes, I have this attach. I even thought to be an art therapist long before I knew of my father's work. I believe in the power of arts to therapeutic. And also in the book, you would see the idea that Thomas lived through a very dark life. The life in camps, he talks a lot about the colors in the camps. They were very gray and dark and black and white. And the first thing he did, drew his life through colors. And it's written in the book. That was his way to, again, to show his victory of spirit over reality. He gave back colors into life. And that was one of his messages. He didn't think of that when he did it. It was just out of his heart. And it's amazing, I think, this decision.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if there aren't, we can catch up and maybe you'll think of something, but I do want to give you the opportunity to memorialize your family, your parents, with a story. So if you have a story, which I asked you to think about at the beginning of the program, and you want to share it with us, please let me know by raising your hand, and I will call on you. Oh, okay, Pavel, hold on a minute. Pavel, you'll have to unmute again. Sorry, there you go.
Okay, now I'm unmute.
Yes.
Well, I remember 1944 when the Swiss Red Cross came to Terezin. I still remember that. I don't know if you know anything about that, but they came in 1944. And I was remembering, I was marching with the other group and singing, and we got a good food that day. I truly remember that.
Good.
And I remember other thing. One time I was walking in Terezin and the truck driver was stopped. He was truck driver who came from outside, and he stopped by me and opened the door. And believe or not, he gave me an apple. So I got an apple for a long time. First time he gave me an apple, but it was a little soft because I think he was sitting on it to hiding the apple. So when he gave me the apple, it was a little soft, but it was a lovely apple. That's my story.
Pavel, you and Vera have how many children?
I have 2 children
And
and
how
7 grandchildren. 7 grandchildren.
7 grandchildren. How and where are they living?
They live all here in Seattle, Washington.
Good for you. Okay, and Zola, you have your hand raised, and Miriam, I'll get to you next. So Zola, hello. Zola is coming to us from Cape Town, South Africa, and she's also going to be our musical addition to next Sunday's program with Miriam and Hank Greenberg. Greenspan, I want to make sure that if you got into today's link, you do it the same way that you do it, so I can see you all again next week. I will work on correcting the link. Go ahead, Zola.
Thank you.
I didn't know if I should be talking again, if I'm going to be talking next week.
Don't worry about it. We love your voice. Go for it.
So I just wanted to, I'm still verklempt, hugely verklempt from Yifat's incredible presentation. And just to bring some background, both my parents were Holocaust survivors, and they were born in Vilna. And my mother was a famous singer in the Vilna ghetto and beyond. And music was something that kept her alive. And her brother was a well-known activist, poet, and songwriter, Leib Rosenthal. My mother was Chayela Rosenthal. And she performed afterwards in deportation camps after the Vilna ghetto, in the concentration camps. After the war, though, my mother never spoke about her experiences. They were just too painful for her. She lost her brother in the camps. And yet, for us and for all her friends and the world, she was this bubbly, full of life personality when she was on stage and singing around the world and bringing joy to everybody and music. So she also used the arts. And my father was a journalist, and so he always spoke about the war and his experience and wrote about it and started a Holocaust survivor group in Cape Town, South Africa. After the war, my parents got to France because Molly Picon, the famous Yiddish actress, happened to notice my mother in a visit to Poland and got her the papers she needed to get out of Poland. And so my mother joined a theater group that took her to South Africa to perform Yiddish theater in 1951. And she sent a telegram back to Paris to my father and said, "You have to come. I found paradise. This is where the new life is." And that's how they got to South Africa and where I still am.
And how many children did your parents
I
have?
do not have children. My parents had 2 children. Myself and my sister was first born 8 years before me. She had 3 children, and they are grandchildren now and great-grandchildren. And I chose not to have children because I felt like I was caring for my parents. And I felt that I didn't want to add more people to care about, except now I care about everybody else's children. But that was the choice that I made.
Sister in Cape Town?
My sister was in Cape Town, then she moved to America. We both lived in America for about 20-something years. She passed away young, 57, and my mother also passed away at 54. So I'm the only one left in South Africa, and my sister was the torchbearer and the Holocaust educator for all the years. But them having passed on in the last decade is when I've come into taking it on taking on the responsibility, whereas beforehand, I left it up to the firstborn child. I was the sunshine, and now I will continue the legacy.
And Miriam, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself, Miriam, please.
If I may, I'd like to just try to share my screen to show the picture of what I want to speak about.
Sure.
This is an experiment, so I figured it's a good time to try it. I don't know if I succeeded. Let's see.
Yeah, you got it. There you go.
I did?
Yep.
So do you see the picture of my parents?
Yes.
Okay, so the story is both my mother and my father were survivors of Auschwitz. And my mother met my father in this little town about an hour north of Prague called Český Dub. Český Dub.
Český Brod.
No, it ends with the D-U-B, Český Dub, like I wrote it in the, you see the written script under the picture? So it was his first exhibition after the Holocaust, and he met my mother at a health spa. It really was a place where the survivors went for a week or so to recover from the agony from the concentration camps. And as you can see, my father looks like he has started his recovery quite well, whereas my mother, she was in mourning for her twin sister, her mother, and other losses of her family. So now I'm curious how I'm going to change the page.
We can't go and do your presentation.
No, but I wanted to show you how they looked at the wedding. It was a completely changed view. So these are the technical things that I have to figure out how to work out for next week.
Use your side arrow bar on your keyboard.
Right, but all I'm seeing is I'm not seeing my presentation. I'm only seeing.
We'll do a Zoom during the week so you're more comfortable.
Oh, that would be really great, Jeffrey. That would be really fantastic.
You need to stop sharing your screen right now.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing it if I can figure that out. See, I have two monitors. This is something new also.
Top of your screen.
All right, so anyway, it doesn't look like I can figure this out right now, but mainly I wanted to tell the story that my parents, oops, all right, I'll get rid of that. Okay, so I got rid of that, but I lost where I am in the Zoom.
You're still sharing your screen at the very top.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing the, oh, I see. Got it.
There you
We're
go.
all, okay, thanks for allowing my experiment. Mainly what I would like to tell you is that my father was a survivor of the Holocaust, but he was also a painter and graphics artist. He was born in 1893, and his artwork is what kept him alive in the camps. And when he survived, he was determined to show the atrocities that he experienced and witnessed to the world. So this was his first exhibition. And then he continued, he married my mother in 1948, and they escaped the communists in 49 for Israel, where I was born. And what I learned from them is that, you know, the challenges of life, they just continue to persevere. They worked hard, and they managed to enjoy life and build a new life. They emigrated to the United States, where my father started a new career in commercial art. So what the will and drive that I saw in both my parents is instilled in me. And this is why it's such a great pleasure and gratifying to present their stories and have this opportunity next week to show my father's artwork.
We are so looking forward to it. And my friend over there with her hand up is Judy. So take it away, Judy.
Hi, this will be brief. There's nothing really, both my parents were also survivors of Auschwitz. Their stories are very similar, although none of them were artists, except my dad owned a grocery store and he did make his own signs. So that was about it for art. But what was a little unique about my parents is that they were in the Feldafing deportation camp, displaced person camp, and they moved to Munich. And my father worked for the JDC. And what makes that a little bit unique is that my mother had tuberculosis, and so she was
JDC for everyone, Judy?
the Joint Distribution Committee, who of course is doing fantastic work in Ukraine, helping with Jews there. Hi, Carla. I met Carla at a JDC meeting. She's a great supporter of that organization, so important to all of us Jews. Somebody said the other day, you know, when the rain falls on a Jew in Ukraine, Americans get out their umbrella. And that's what's happening today. But anyway, I digress. So anyway, my mother had tuberculosis. They were living in Munich and she had to go to Garmisch for her rehab and whatever. And finally, my parents said, no, we're going to Israel. And the doctors, where my father worked in the hospital with JDC, said, oh no, you can't go to Israel. It's too dusty, too dirty, and they don't have doctors there right now. So guess what? The doctors arranged for my parents in 1949 to fly right here where I live in San Diego, California. My parents literally came out of the deepest, darkest bowels of Europe and stepped out to palm trees and sunshine. And my mother didn't put shoes on, I think, for years. And, you know, as all refugees, it was not an easy transition, no matter where you were. But I too, Miriam, I learned great resilience from my parents, the biggest lesson of all, to be resilient and to never give up and know that, you know, even out of the worst conditions, you can make a good life. So that was the story of my parents. There's much more, of course, but that's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, Judy. Sarah, you wanted to chime in. Please unmute yourself. There you go. I can't hear you, so you're still muted.
I know why.
There you go.
There we go. I am not a parent or a child of survivors. My parents are not Jewish. However, I've been studying it since I was 4 years old. And I remember the first story I heard, and I've got three very, very brief stories. The first story I heard was from a couple who had come to my church to tell their story. And I will briefly tell you theirs. They were born at each of them, their names were Walter and Dina Oppenheimer, and they were both born in Holland before the war. And when the war broke out, they were teenagers and they did not know each other, but their parents sent them to live in the countryside with two different Christian families who took them in and sheltered them and hid them. And one of the stories I remember was Dina saying that there was a day where the SS had come to the house. I don't know why, but the family hid her in the wall, and she was in the wall for over 8 hours. And the only thing she could think of is she had to go pee. But both her and Walter survived and came to America and ended up meeting here in America and married, and spent the rest of their lives telling their stories to anyone who would listen, to spread awareness of the Holocaust. My second story is my youngest granddaughter, her other grandmother and I were speaking one day, just talking about a book I've been writing for a very long time. And she told me a story of her mother who was born and raised in Munich. So her mother and her grandmother would go down to where Dachau was, and they would have potatoes with them. And when Germans would walk by, they would pretend to be throwing rocks and saying things that were not very nice at the time, but to placate the Germans so that they could send the potatoes over the wall to the Jews on the other side. And I thought that was that really impacted me, that there was this young girl who, it was her choice to do this, to take potatoes down to the wall, to throw over the wall, to make sure that these people would get food. And it was her idea to make it look like she was throwing rocks and being mean to them, when in reality, she was actually sending food to them. The third story is when I started writing this book, I pulled it back out again in 2010, and I had met this woman here in town who I did not know at the time was Jewish. And I had called her about another business, and she asked me to bring over my books because she wanted to read it. And I was very nervous, and because I didn't know, me being not Jewish, I didn't know how she would react to me writing about the Holocaust. And she told me her family story, that she lost almost all of her entire family in Poland. And it affected her mother so bad that her mother was never able to speak about it. And because of it, she never really talked about it. And through my writing this book and her helping me with it, now she's able to talk about the Holocaust and talk about the impact on her family. And she has since become my dearest, closest friend. And I have adopted her as my Jewish mama. And she is teaching me so much about what it truly means to be Jewish. And so those are my three stories about how my impact with, what I've learned from being around people who have been in the Holocaust. I've met so many survivors, I could talk about it forever, all of their different stories and different things that they have shared with me. But those were the three that were the most.
Well, Sarah, I want to thank you for sharing your stories. I want, on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for coming and giving us a different lens to look at this, our education through, which is through you. And if you can tell us what your book is called, we would like to hear it. And if you put it in chat, we'd like to see we'd like everyone to see it. So if you can tell us what it's called, please do.
I'm still in the process of finishing up the final revisions and editing. But
you have a title?
It's actually, there are three. It's a trilogy. The first one is named For the Will to Live. The second one will be After the Fire. And the third one is Finding Aaron. And a brief synopsis, it's about a young woman who, because of some things that her brother, some situations that her brother goes through, her entire family has been arrested, her mother, her father, her husband, and she and her brother are forced to leave Vienna to escape the Nazis. And with the plan to go back to get her 2-year-old son, who is with a neighbor being cared for, and she's unable to go back to get him. So it's everything that happens to them. They both end up at Auschwitz. She ends up
okay, I don't want
medical sterilization, but they survive. And
private message, I'd love to talk to you about it. And Ava, if you're still there, I don't see you on screen, but maybe you can get yourself back on screen. I have a question for you. And Mark, do you have any contribution to our discussion? I want to introduce everyone to Mark Newhouse, and Mark is going to be presenting with Joanne Gilbert in our May 15th program. So welcome, Mark, and it's nice to see you on screen again. And I'm sorry you had difficulties getting in like everyone else did, my fault, but go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm really overwhelmed by the program today. I thought it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I was born 2 years and 1 day after my mother was freed from Auschwitz. And it was always the shadow in my life. But I have to tell you, my parents never really talked about it. And I grew up with the idea that the Lodz ghetto was Anatevka from Fiddler on the Roof. Ignorance is bliss. it took me a long time before I actually learned the truth. And in all honesty, I have a tremendous amount of guilt by the fact that I lost a very important part of my family's legacy and the secrets of how they survived. So when I saw that beautiful, the artwork today, I thought to myself how much I wish my father or my mother had just made stick figures to show what they went through, because I can't really share with my grandchildren what I did not know until recently. I've also written books, but when I wrote them, I thought to myself that it was only to help my grandchildren learn what I did not know. And the first person I gave my first book to was a staunch, wonderful Catholic professor. And when he read it, he said, "Mark, this is an amazing book. You have to publish it." But I was still not convinced. And whenever I hear someone like the people I heard today with such passion and such emotion, I just think to myself, I'm so glad that I accidentally discovered what happened to my parents and to 250,000 people in the Lodz, that's how I have to say it in English, the Lodz ghetto. And in a few weeks, I hope you'll come back so I can share the story with you, because I think that it changed my life. And my job now is to help other people see how knowing about the Holocaust should give us such a positive view of what we can do to help others. So thank you, Jeffrey.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed today's program,
Great.
and I'm honored that you asked me to present to you.
Yep. And my cousin Ava's sitting here. Hi, Ava. Thank you. I'd like to come to you in a minute. But Ava, I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit about your mom and what your mom did and what she donated to U.S. Holocaust Museum. So I think the story is amazing. And I forget to mention that you're speaking to the group in June. So my whole roster is here today. So that's exciting.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And thank you for this wonderful program. Each and every time, I'm so addicted to it. I will miss everything else, but attend your programs because they are just amazing. And today's was also. So I was born in Czechoslovakia after World War II, and both my parents were Holocaust survivors. The part of Czechoslovakia that during the war was ceded to Hungary. So my parents became Hungarian. And because of that, my mother and all four of my grandparents were deported to Auschwitz in 1944. The Hungarians were the last ones to be deported. My father was in forced labor camps. And my father was married, had a daughter. His wife and daughter were gassed in Auschwitz. And my mother happened to meet them by coincidence in the ghetto. In Auschwitz, all four of my grandparents went straight to the gas chambers. My mother and her little sister, 16-year-old, were selected to go to the other side temporarily for work, which was never assigned. What happened is, after a few months in Auschwitz, my mother and aunt were selected to go to the gas chambers. But on that day, the Nazis ran out of Zyklon B. So they stood there all day, all night, and in the morning, an order came from Germany that they need workers in a munition factory. So they took the women from in front of the gas chambers, an additional few hundred women. 1,000 women were put on cattle trains and taken to Hessisch-Lichtenau in Germany. Hessisch-Lichtenau was one of the largest munition factories in Europe. And my mother, she was fluent in German, and the Nazis selected her to be a translator and a messenger. And they said, and if there is no translation to do or no messages to take through the vast complex, then we want you to clean the factory. And they gave her a little identification pin because she had to take messages. So my mother was, so of course, in Hesse-Schlichtenau, in the munition factory, they continued starving. Portions were very small. And every evening when they were back in the barracks, the women would gather together and they would talk about food because people were starving, people were dying of hunger. And when my mother was able to clean the munition factory, and so one day she found a stack of paper in the wastebasket. She pilfered this stack of paper when no one saw her, and she quickly tore the bottom of her one piece of ragged clothing and made it into like a purse pouch and hid these forms into this pouch and hid it. She found a little pencil, and every evening in the barracks, when the women were talking about food, what they used to eat, what they used to cook, or what was their favorite food, what they made for the holidays or for Shabbat, my mother was writing every evening, would write the recipes on this piece of paper. The paper that she pilfered was, on one side was by the Nazis, they printed the ammunition. They printed the ammunition that they manufactured in that factory. So on one side, it had the name of which type of ammunition they made, which annihilated the Jews, used to annihilate the Jews. And the other side was blank. And that's where my mother was writing the recipes. To make the story short, she was able to hide it all through the many months in Hesse-Schlichtenau, throughout the Death March, 2 weeks of Death March, and the recipes survived and went back to Czechoslovakia with my mother and my aunt. And my mother used those recipes throughout her life. And when we emigrated to the United States, the recipes came with us to the United States. And today they reside in the United Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.
And how many are there?
A little bit over 600.
Wow.
So, it's interesting because my mother, who was an Auschwitz survivor as well, never wrote and was an amazing baker. And that I write a column called In Mama's Kitchen. And never did I ever remember my mother ever writing a recipe or using a written recipe to make any of her bakes. And there were over a couple hundred. And when my sister in 2008 asked my mother a couple of years before she was going to pass to write a narration that she could finally formalize these recipes, my mother couldn't do it. A bissel of this, a pinch of that, taste it. And she put all these stupid answers into a scan, sent it to me. And in 2008, I didn't open it until I retired in 2016. And I figured I needed something to do. So my wife, Myra, said, why don't you start cooking and baking? And so I started baking. I took out the recipe and it was just like a hieroglyphics. I couldn't read a one. And since 2016, I have now perfected 50 of my mom's recipes, and I published them in social media. And Ava and I have become good buddies. Ava's from Minneapolis, and so am I. I was there for 15 years. We never met in Minneapolis. We happened to meet on Zoom. And and please tell us the title of your book, which is fabulous.
The title of the book is Hidden Recipes. I don't know if you can see.
Yep.
Hidden Recipes. And so I tell the story about my mother, but I also wanted to tell the story about my father. So I also tell my father's story and my other side of the family. And then at the very end of the book, I published a few, I translated into English a few of the recipes. So there are some of the recipes, I don't know if you can see that,
Yeah,
but there are some
I
pretty well known.
I baked all of your recipes, Ava.
Oh, you did all of, yes. There are some well-known recipes.
I'm going to try to end this, Rona. I see you're again have a hand raised, or maybe you didn't move it down from the last time. I just want to make sure I don't omit. If you
Yeah,
want
I could add something about my dad.
all right, please. And anybody else who want to conclude with the comment about your parents, that's good. And I haven't heard from you, Jeanette. So and Ava, I don't know where you went. So I hate to lose you, Ava. So come back. So go ahead, Ron.
Oh yeah, so my dad's name was Marcel Baruch, and he was born in Dorhoi, Romania, and he in 1933, and he was, you know, he lost everything he had. He was forced to go to Transnistria, which I understand is a little bit of right between Moldova and Ukraine, and lived in filth, forced labor. And then finally in 1948, he went to Israel. He served as a medic. He went to nursing school, became a registered nurse in Israel, and he worked as a medic in the army and fought in the Suez crisis. And then, interestingly, a woman that he went to nursing school, Rachel Rakovich, brought him over to America to study nursing and go to medical school in Washington, D.C. He never finished medical school, but he came to Columbia University and did a master's in public health, became the hospital administrator for Brookdale Hospital, and worked there for 33 years. And he was really like, you know, made something of himself. And, you know, I really value seeing all these drawings that Yifat showed us, because I don't really have much from my dad. But what I do have, I can show you later in life. He got cancer and wasn't able to really do anything, but he did start to do painting. And so he could show you some paintings he made. But yeah, this is like, he was disabled later in life, but he just took to painting. So
maybe you can tell us a little bit about your younger sister and what's cooking with her.
Oh, so my sister Karen, I'm one of 3 girls, and each one of us has, like, you know, some magical power of grit. And Karen, my older sister, is a psychologist, and she wrote her second book on teens and grit and having resilience. So maybe one day she can present her book on the show.
Yeah, we're talking, Karen and I, so it's cool.
Okay.
And I just want to ask Jeanette, is there anything you want to contribute? And then I also want to let you know, this has all been recorded. So to broaden out this educational platform, you can send this recording or have people visit the YouTube channel, which will be launching. This program will be on the YouTube channel tomorrow. So Jeanette, you're last, then I see Arnold's side handshake there, so I'll grab you.
Okay. Well, no.
You're struggling with the background, so
I am struggling. Hold on a second. There we go.
Yeah, put it in front of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. This book, it was Brown Was the Danube. It's long out of print, but still available in various places. My aunt, my grandaunt, Helen Strom Hilsenrod, wrote the book, and it's essentially a diary of our family, a biography of our family through the Holocaust years. I lost family in the Holocaust on both sides. My mother was born in Alexandria, Egypt, and my father, Norbert, was born in Vienna, Austria in 1926. He had an uncle. He came from a line of, even though professionally he was a pharmacist, he came from a line of wonderful singers. They all had beautiful voices. And one uncle was an actor and singer at the Lvov the Lvov Theater, and he was killed by the Nazis. And I'm still trying to figure out what, exactly whether it was when he was trying to escape through Belgium. Haven't been able to figure it out. But when Dad was 13 years old, my Omama, who was born in Przemysl, Poland, was the president of several districts simultaneously of WITSA women, World Zionist Organization women. And so she was able to use her influence as the political situation became very bad and deteriorated rapidly, to get her children out of Vienna. The elder son went to America, went to the United States. The other two, my father and my aunt, were sent to England, not on a kinder transport, but through other means. They were able to get through, where they were with refugee families. In those days, if one were not able to pay their debts, they were put in jail. And my grandfather was a poor businessman. They through the family had many cinemas throughout Vienna, and he was not able to keep his end well. And so my father would go and visit his father in prison. And the last time he saw him, he wanted to give his father, he didn't know it was going to be the last time. He was looking through at his father through the holes in the grid, the rails, and he wanted to hug, he asked if he could hug his son. And the guards would not allow it. And that was the last time he saw his father. He had a siddur, which I have now, that was basically his bar mitzvah gift. That was the last time he saw his father. So anyway, that is my story.
And are you doing anything from a Holocaust education that I recall, or?
Yes, I spent 6 hours, roughly 6 hours, interviewing my late father about his life, and he spoke of the Holocaust and how it affected his life. And he was very articulate, my dad, and it's just a beautiful record to have, and I have it all on videotape. Genealogy keeps it all alive for me, being able to, from both sides of my family, being able to have interviews that I took of all of my late family, both sides, sort of invigorates the family tree and makes it come alive. It's so important. Food is a great vehicle, as you spoke. Food is the universal language to keep these recipes alive, and also to, while we still have our senior members, to interview them, to memorialize them, and to introduce them in the living form to children yet unborn. That's the most important thing, is to keep our legacies alive.
Thank you. And
Thank
Arnold,
you.
I'll give you the last word. Go ahead. You have to unmute, Arnold. Can't hear you, Arnold. Now we lost your screen. So hold on a second. Now we can hear you, but we can't
Okay.
see.
Well, I just wanted to say that you did away with the screen. That's the problem. The presentations that you've arranged for in the past, and I know the ones you've got scheduled for the future, will be very impressive. I just wanted to comment on Yifat's presentation today. I just was really
Why don't you tell a little bit of history about who you are, so that we know where you're coming from?
Well, I've been for years a Jewish communal service worker, having served as the CEO in New Orleans and more recently in Jewish family service in Los Angeles. And I've had the opportunity to arrange for speakers and presentation throughout the years. In New Orleans, for example, our young leaders who we train to assume a leadership role in the community, we would always have people coming in, and certainly one place was to share their experiences with surviving the Holocaust. Today, I thought Yifat brought to us a beautiful presentation, obviously with the artwork. But I think Yifat, what was so clear to me and what was so impactful was your love, your devotion that you feel toward your father. And it just really, I guess, revived in me the love I feel for my parents. And it just was kind of a wonderful experience, very moving. And I wanted to say thank you for being with us today.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this program, Arnold. And you always have a way that's like the exit strategy. So I'm going to come to you every time I need an exit strategy to get out of a program. So I want to thank you for staying with us. We almost are hitting the 3-hour mark. I'm sorry again, I apologize for the difficulties at the beginning, but we certainly, with Yifat's presentation and with Carla's singing, it was something special today. And I want you to return. We have really 2 more great programs. If you know survivors and you want to bring them to the 24th program, it is a survivor program and a survivor storytelling program in a unique way. We're not revisiting the camps, but we're going to do something really special. So thank you all. I love you all. So we'll see you next week, hopefully.
Thank you, Jeffrey, so much for this amazing project. And thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Yifat, for helping me out. Appreciate it. I'll be in touch with you. Thank you. Thank you, Carla.
You're the best.